The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander.
Hello and welcome to Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers.
Hello, everyone.
We hope all you listeners had a good New Year's.
Yes, we do. And we hope that 2024 is a good year for all of you.
So, if you listened to last week's episode, then you know that Beth was sick. And then the day after Christmas, I got sick with COVID, which I'm still dealing with, so we apologize for not putting out a bonus episode this month. But we just weren't feeling very well. And please forgive me for this episode if I sound a bit off, because I'm still dealing with the head congestion from COVID, and it makes it a bit difficult.
Yeah, it was kind of a crappy end to our year.
That it was.
A little bit. But I'm feeling better now, and you seem to be at the tail end of it. So hopefully you'll be better within the next couple days.
Well, I hope so, because I'm tired of it already.
I know.
Like 6 days of it, 7 days, it's gotten old. I've never slept this much.
Oh, I haven't slept this little. I haven't been sleeping very much. Last night was the first night of really good sleep that I said I'd had in like 2 weeks. It was lovely. And then I found out you didn't sleep at all.
No, not really. In the NyQuil, it didn't knock me out like it normally does. I think I've had too much of it in the past couple days.
You've built up a resistance.
It must be.
So this was something pretty cool that I came across that was a pretty interesting coincidence. So our neighbor who did our pre-show disclaimer for us that all of you hear at the beginning of every episode, well, he just gave us an issue of 40 Times magazine, and it's from the year 2000. It's a pretty cool publication out of the UK, and as I was reading through it the other day, in one of the sidebars, there was a blurb about a mummified hand that was just discovered in Cornwall. So remember, this was from the year 2000. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. That's so cool, because it's one of the hands of glory that I mentioned in episode 84. So I thought, how weird is that I'm reading it now, and there it is when it actually happened. It was just a very cool coincidence.
It is weird how things kind of come back in a coincidental way.
Yeah, and the thing is if I had read that before we did that episode, I mean, I wouldn't have really thought anything about it. You know, I certainly wouldn't have connected the two together. So since we had done the episode, I was like, wow, so strange.
And speaking of coincidences, a little while back, we did an episode on Percy Fawcett. Percy was an early 20th century explorer who disappeared in the Amazon while searching for what he called the lost city of Z.
Yeah, Fawcett was pretty much the embodiment of what we picture early 20th century explorers to be like. He was handsome, dashing, and a little bit dangerous.
And there were only 3 members of his expedition for the majority of it. Just him, his son Jack, and his son's friend Raleigh. And to this day, the exact cause of his disappearance in 1925 remains a mystery. And there is even more speculation that he chose to go missing so that he could live like a king in the jungle. And what's really fascinating about that is that his own wife believed that that's what he did. If you haven't listened to episode 59, you should check it out.
Yeah, it was a good episode. And it turns out that while on some of his earlier expeditions in the Mato Grosso area of South America, Percy Fawcett came across what he believed was the South American version of Bigfoot. According to author Ivan Sanderson, in his 1967 book, Things, Percy Fawcett wrote extensively in his journal about his Bigfoot encounter in 1914. According to Fawcett's journal, at some point, he and his fellow explorers came across members of the Magzubis tribe. The Magzubis worshipped the sun and had a pretty good understanding of the stars. For example, they had names for all of the planets. They also told stories of the Maricoxi, a Bigfoot-like tribe that lived in the Northeast, not too far away. Percy Fawcett pretty much shrugged off their stories as folk tales. After a few days, Fawcett and his party moved on, and as they crossed into what they thought was completely uninhabited jungle, something pretty unnerving happened. Suddenly, the expedition found themselves facing two strange humanoid creatures. Fawcett described them as very large, naked, and very hairy. They had abnormally long arms and broad foreheads sloping back from pronounced eye ridges. They were heading straight towards Fawcett at a trot and speaking some sort of guttural language. When Fawcett tried to speak to them in Maxubi, these two creatures actually raised bows and aimed arrows at them before taking off into the jungle.
And Fawcett, well, he kind of brushed it off or shook it off, and then the men continued on. As dusk approached, the men halted in the middle of the jungle as the unmistakable sound of a horn reached their ears. Before they could even fathom what kind of horn it was, they were surrounded by the sound of more. It was as if an entire group of people were about to ambush them, blowing on their horns to signal to each other. Then, in the silence after the horns died down, the jungle was filled with shouts and what Fawcett referred to as jabbering. When no attack came, Fawcett pushed on, and eventually the men found a suitable place to camp for the night, inside a takora thicket. They figured the thick thorns would protect them. Apparently, the creatures did come pretty close, although Fawcett couldn't see them. He could hear them, though, and they were grunting and jabbering all around the thicket as if they were closing in, but afraid to approach the thorns.
Eventually, the creatures left, and the men awoke the next morning to no sign of them. Feeling relatively safe, they spent another night. Then, undaunted, they continued on. About a quarter of a mile on, the men came across a village in a clearing, but it was unlike any village they had ever seen before. Dozens of these Bigfoot-like creatures just lounged around, but some of them seemed to be making arrows. Fawcett whistled, and I'm not sure if it was to get their attention or if it was like a holy cow kind of whistle. But as soon as the sound escaped his lips, one of the creatures jumped to its feet, emitted several grunts, and took aim with an arrow, all in the span of seconds. As soon as the first one took aim, creatures all around the village followed suit, so pretty soon Fawcett was in a pretty dicey situation. Fawcett claimed he tried once more to speak to these creatures in Maxubi, but the creatures did not seem to understand. One of them even pulled his bowstring back and aimed his 6-foot-long arrow straight at Fawcett's chest. Fawcett stared him down, and the allegedly ape-like creature lowered and raised the arrow 2 more times. Finally, Fawcett pulled his gun and shot at the ground close to the creature's feet. The creature ran, but his cohorts did not. The clearing filled with flying arrows. Fawcett and his companions ran like hell and escaped unscathed.
Although this was the end of his Bigfoot encounter during this trip, on future trips, Fawcett learned about at least 2 other types of Bigfoot that were said to live in the Amazon. One type, called the morcego, or bat people, allegedly lived in holes in the ground and had an incredible sense of smell. Now, whether Percy Fawcett really ran into a village of arrow-shooting Bigfoots is highly questionable. He did write about a species of double-nosed dogs who turned out to be real, but it does seem more likely that he interpreted this village in his own way, and that this tribe was simply a tribe of humans. But tales of the Maricoxi have existed for centuries. According to an article published by Rainforest Cruises, Maricoxi is the overall name for several Bigfoot-like creatures that are said to roam the Amazon jungle. There are actually 5 different species of Maricoxi. They are all hairy and human or ape-like, and they're very aggressive. They do live in villages, and they seem to know how to construct and use bow and arrows, quite successfully, I may add, although they are scared off by gunshots. They range from 2 to 6 feet tall, although some are reportedly as tall as 12 feet, and some have feet that face backwards. So basically, they range from hairy pygmy-sized creatures to full-blown Sasquatch types. But the Maricoxi aren't the only strange furry creatures said to inhabit the Amazon jungle. There is also the Mapingauri, and it is quite the scary-sounding creature.
According to allthat'sinteresting.com, Mapingauri are covered in reddish fur from head to toe. They have long claws that curl inward when they walk on all fours. But when they stand on their hind legs, they can be 7 feet tall. And, this is the scary part, when they do stand on 2 feet, they reveal a second gaping mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth, right smack in the middle of their stomachs. This stomach mouth is said to devour any living creature, including humans. A New York Times article adds some more concerning details. The Mapingauri is said to give off a horrible stench, and some sightings claim that the creature only has one eye, like a cyclops. Its reddish fur covers a hide so thick that the only way to kill one is with a bullet to the head.
Rainforest Cruises adds even more details. Clouds of black beetles tend to precede it or follow it. Mapingauri are shaped like a black bear but have the claws of an armadillo. Its face looks ape-like or even human-like. It emits a roar that many people have described as thunderous. And of course, it has that gaping, razor-toothed stomach mouth. So, it's huge. It's ape-like and covered in fur. It's very aggressive towards humans, but it is nearly impossible to kill. It sounds Bigfooty, but it also doesn't, because it also has that terrifying extra mouth thing.
And that is terrifying. Can you imagine this creature stands up and in it, where its stomach is this huge gaping mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth?
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine? It comes up and just wants to put its arms around you, give you a hug, and next thing you know, its belly opens up and revealing these sharp razor-like teeth, and then whoop, there you go. It's kind of like something you'd see in a cartoon.
Yeah, and I've never heard of any other creature like that.
So with that said, the creature is understandably feared, and every single Amazonian tribe had their own name for it. And from the sound of it, they were very careful not to upset it, because legends surrounding it said that people who abused the rainforest in any way were the biggest targets.
In a lot of ways, the Mapingauri sounds as far-fetched as Fawcett's Village of Bigfoots. But believe it or not, there are some scientists who are out to prove that the Mapingauri exists, but that it isn't quite what people think it is.
One prevalent theory is that the Mapingauri is a relative of the Megatherium, or giant sloth, which died about 8,000 years ago. And we'll explain how after this quick break.
Hey, did you know? In Strasbourg in July of 1518, a woman walked into the town center and began to dance. There was no music, but she danced and danced. For an entire week, she didn't stop, until sheer exhaustion killed her. But by then, hundreds of other townsfolk were also dancing. They had no music either, nor no known reason. They just danced and danced. Then, in September, they just stopped. To this day, no one knows what caused the dancing plague of 1518, but it wasn't the first time everyday people just began dancing for no reason and couldn't stop until exhaustion claimed them. Who'd have thunk it?
Alrighty, we're back. When we left off before, we left you wondering how a giant ground sloth, which went extinct 8,000 years ago, could be the furry creature some people are calling a Bigfoot in the Amazon rainforest. How's that for a recap?
That's pretty good.
So, according to allthat'sinteresting.com, giant sloths or megatheriums did exist in South America up through the end of the Pleistocene era. They were bigger than elephants, measuring 20 feet from head to tail, and weighed anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 pounds. They'd stand on their hind legs, using their tails for balance so they could reach the best leaves. They also walked funny because of their curved claws. They walked on the sides of their feet rather than flat-footed. We know a lot of this to be true because scientists have discovered 11,000-year-old skeletons in an area that spans from Chile all the way to Florida. They've also studied thousands of giant sloth tunnels, some of which are 9 feet high by 9 feet wide and as long as 2,000 feet. For years, researchers thought these tunnels were man-made and that their claw marks were pickaxe marks. But it turns out that the deep scratches inside the tunnels are in fact claw marks from the giant ground sloths that dug them.
Unlike the Mapingauri, though, the giant sloth was a vegetarian. So if the creature is a giant sloth, that doesn't explain why it's allegedly still attacking cattle to this day. But bear with us.
The theory, then, is that not all megatheriums went extinct, that some have evolved and are still hiding deep within the Amazon jungle. And since they don't like getting wet very much, the drier regions of the jungle are perfect for them.
In the late 1800s, a paleontologist named Florentino Ameghino heard accounts from locals near Patagonia that certainly sounded like there was a species of ground sloth hanging around. And to this day, people are still seeing them. According to a New York Times article from 1997, a 27-year-old man named Giovanni Caritiana had an encounter that left him pretty shaken. His sighting occurred in 1994 while he was hunting in a western Amazonian area that his tribe calls the Cave of the Mapingauri. Caritiana said that the creature was coming towards his village, giving off a horrendously foul stench. The closer it got to him, the worse the stench became, until it overpowered the poor man to the point that he actually passed out. When he returned to the site later with his father, both men noted that there was a path through the foliage as if something very large had moved through. All of the vines and even some trees were flattened.
Another man, João Batista Azevedo, claimed that he saw a Mapingauri while he was on a 45-day canoe trip. Although, to be fair, his encounter sounds more traditional Bigfoot-like than the giant sloth-like. He claimed he was on the shore of the river when he heard a horrible scream. When he looked up, he saw a hairy ape-like man come running out of the forest. Covered in fur, this creature, which was on 2 legs, caught sight of him and ran back into the jungle. Since many people who live in the Amazon strongly believe that the Mapingauri targets those who go past certain natural boundaries or who take advantage of natural resources, they are reluctant to hunt the creature. But there have been enough reliable accounts to get some experts interested in proving whether or not a giant sloth does still exist in the Amazon.
Like David Oren, for example, a Harvard-trained biologist and former director of research at the Geldy Institute. Recently, a species of giant peccary, which is like a razorback pig — I had to look that up because I thought it was a bird. It's not. It's a giant pig. It was proven to still exist in the rainforest, even though scientists laughed at the idea for years. So, why not a giant sloth? Oren was intrigued by the hundreds of eyewitness accounts, especially since so many of them describe seeing mothers with offspring and people finding feces samples. His first trip to look for the giant sloth was in 1994, and over the years he's collected some pretty compelling evidence. He was able to photograph claw marks in trees that he couldn't identify, as well as capture audio recordings of strange, thunderous roars. Some of them lasted a full minute. He also made casts of odd, round footprints with backwards-facing claws, and he's collected 22 pounds of feces. So it sounds like a giant sloth.
It does.
With the backwards claws and all of that. So it's 2024 now, and Oren still hasn't definitely proven that the giant sloth is still out there, but he hasn't given up, despite being called a kook by some of his peers.
Then there's also Glenn Shepard Jr., an ethnobiologist and anthropologist. He listened to the stories about the Mapingauri with polite skepticism until a member of a local tribe told him he saw one in the National Museum of History in Lima once. The creature he described was in an exhibit featuring a giant sloth. Shepard suggests that the giant sloth may not physically inhabit the Amazon, but its memory does. In other words, people are retelling old stories that have been passed down for thousands of years and convincing themselves that something they saw or are seeing is a giant ground sloth.
Interesting.
So in other words, they're misidentifying a creature and calling it by the name of the closest thing it resembles, even if that thing is extinct. It's certainly possible. Although a 1997 LA Times article about David Oren kind of puts that theory to the test. He discussed countless interviews that he had done with local people who had claimed to have seen a 6-foot-tall, 400-pound, reddish-furred creature of the jungle. Many of these people were terrified by what they had seen and refused to return to the spots where they had their encounters.
One gold prospector shared that he'd seen a giant monkey covered in reddish fur and that it was standing on 2 feet. The creature charged the man, but the terrified prospector was able to shoot it directly in the face. The poor man then fainted on the spot. When he brought Oren to the place where he'd shot it, there was a pool of blood, leading Oren to believe that the man had definitely seen and wounded something. Although there wasn't a body, the team did find strange tracks. They were large and round with backward claws.
During that same expedition, while staying in a jungle hut, Oren heard several weird roaring sounds, unlike any animal call he had ever heard before. Once was during the day, But then he heard it again a few nights later, after the moon rose. But was it a giant sloth? That still seems to be the question, or one of them. There are actually a lot of questions, going all the way back to 1914 and Percy Fawcett.
Right, like did Fawcett really encounter a whole village of Bigfoot? Or did he misinterpret a regular tribe of people, seeing them through the lens of an early 20th century European explorer with certain judgments and ideas? Or did he know what he was seeing, but then embellish it in his journals to make it all seem more exotic and exciting?
And what about all of those sightings in the 21st century? Are hundreds of people misidentifying some animal? Or are all these people seeing a ground sloth? Or are they seeing something else? An actual South American Amazon jungle Bigfoot?
Well, until David Oren or someone like him actually photographs one or catches one, we won't know the answer. But until then, it's a pretty darn good mystery.
And I could see there still being a gigantic sloth.
Why not?
Right, why not? We know they've thought several things went extinct and then come to find out, they're still alive out there.
Or things that may not even have gone extinct, but that they said couldn't even possibly exist. I mean, the most famous example is the silverback gorillas, right?
Right.
They said that that was just mystical. They're mythical. They didn't exist. And then this giant peccary, which is not a bird.
Right.
Right. And I mean, Fawcett wrote in his journals about the double-nosed dog, and those turned out to be real. So,
yeah, among other things.
Yeah.
The only thing is the huge mouth with teeth for a stomach.
Right. But if people are actually seeing or saw a giant ground sloth, I mean, you could be so terrified of this thing. I mean, it's massive. You said it was 20 feet from head to tail.
Yeah.
And up to 10,000 pounds. So you see that thing stand on two legs. I'd probably tell you it had 6 stomach mouths and snakes coming out of its mouth.
Right.
It
sounds quite terrifying.
It does.
Either way, the size of it would be terrifying, whether it had teeth in its stomach or not.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, it's a part of the world that I've never been to.
You mean you haven't been to the Amazon?
I've never been to South America, no.
Wow, a place that you haven't been.
No.
Unbelievable.
I know. And I don't know a lot about the mythology and the cultures of the Amazon, but it's definitely interesting.
That it is.
Good old Percy Fawcett.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it's still a mystery.
Yeah, we say that a lot. There's things that we would like to still have as mysteries.
Yeah, I like the idea that there are still things that may be roaming around out there that we don't know about. Or that we thought it went extinct and aren't.
They're still out there happily munching leaves.
That's right.
And yeah. Yeah,
Well,
who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Well, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode.
Yes, you made it through.
Yeah.
You didn't have a coughing fit or anything. You didn't blow your nose. You just soldiered on through.
Yeah, I held my breath a lot.
Well, as always, if you would like to know more about the Mapingauri or the giant ground sloth, you can always check out our sources in our show notes.
With that said, join us next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.